Sanctions are presented as the alternative to military force, economic pressure instead of violence, isolation instead of invasion. The promise is straightforward. Apply financial and trade restrictions. Wait for the pain to become unbearable. Watch the government change course. If this worked consistently, wars would be short. They are not. Most sanctioned governments continue their operations, some for years, some for decades. The question is not whether sanctions hurt economies. They do. The question is whether that pain produces the intended political outcome. It rarely does. Sanctions are designed to restrict access to money, trade routes, technology, international banking systems. The theory is mechanical. Cut off resources. Economic pain increases. That pain flows upward through the system. Leaders feel pressure. Leaders change behavior. It assumes governments operate like businesses responding to market signals. Revenue drops. Costs rise. Operations become unsustainable. Sanctions are framed as rational tools. Technical interventions. Apply pressure at specific points, produce specific outcomes. The model is clean. The reality is not. Sanctions do not fail primarily because leaders are irrational or ideologically committed. They fail because pain does not move in the expected direction. Pressure does not flow upward toward decision makers. It spreads outward and downward through the population. This distribution pattern explains most sanction failures. The system does not function as designed because the pressure never reaches the point where decisions get made. When sanctions take effect, civilians absorb the initial impact. Import restrictions create shortages. Currency devaluation raises prices. Medical supplies become scarce. Food costs increase. Infrastructure degrades without replacement parts. Meanwhile, elites maintain insulated access. Government officials, military leadership, connected business operators. They do not experience the same deprivation. They control distribution networks. They access foreign currency reserves. They bypass restrictions through informal channels. Decision makers remain buffered from the consequences they are supposed to feel. Public suffering does not translate into elite pressure. The pain exists. But it exists in the wrong place. External economic pressure often produces internal political consolidation. When a government faces sanctions, it gains justification to centralize control. Emergency powers expand. Distribution systems come under state management. Scarcity itself becomes a tool of governance. Access to goods, employment, travel permissions. These become rewards for loyalty. Opposition groups lose leverage because survival depends increasingly on state-controlled channels. Governments also gain a narrative advantage. External sanctions can be framed as foreign aggression. Domestic opposition becomes associated with foreign interests. Dissent gets reframed as alignment with the sanctioning powers. Sanctions intended to weaken a government can structurally strengthen its domestic position. States under sustained sanctions do not collapse. They adapt. Trade routes get rerouted through third countries. Shell companies obscure transactions. Barter arrangements replace formal currency exchanges. Smuggling networks professionalize. Parallel markets emerge. These are not temporary black markets. They are structured alternative systems with established operators, pricing mechanisms, and enforcement. Over time, these informal systems harden into permanent infrastructure. Sanctions also become predictable. Once imposed, governments and businesses adjust their operations accordingly. The economy contracts. Living standards fall. But the system does not break. It reconfigures. Sanctions do not just fail to produce desired outcomes. They change the underlying incentive structure. Economic pressure shifts state priorities. Survival no longer depends on efficiency or growth. It depends on control and access management. Compromise with sanctioning powers becomes structurally harder. Adaptation requires building systems that function outside international frameworks. Reversing course would mean dismantling those systems and the power structures they support. This is not neutral pressure. It is system reshaping pressure. When formal trade channels close, informal channels become highly profitable. Smuggling operations generate significant revenue. Individuals and groups that control these channels gain wealth and influence. They develop vested interests in maintaining the sanctioned environment. Scarcity also increases the value of loyalty. When the government controls access to essential goods, proximity to power determines material well-being. Corruption does not decrease under sanctions. It intensifies. Officials controlling distribution points extract rents. Businesses pay premiums for access. The line between state authority and private profit blurs. Power concentrates around those who manage adaptation. Military units controlling smuggling routes, ministries managing import licenses, connected firms accessing foreign currency. These actors benefit from sanctions remaining in place. Ending sanctions would eliminate their leverage. The longer sanctions persist, the more entrenched these interests become. Sanctions operate on slow timelines. Economic contraction takes months. Social pressure builds gradually. Political consequences develop over years. Leaders operate on much shorter horizons. Immediate survival. Next month's coup risk. This year's internal power balance. Military commanders demanding resources now. Elite factions requiring payoffs today. Populations also adjust downward over time. Standards of living decline. But people adapt. Expectations reset. Behaviors change. What initially felt like crisis becomes normalized as the new baseline. The pain does not compound indefinitely. It diffuses. Pressure peaks in the early phase when disruption is sharpest. Then it plateaus. Adaptation takes hold. The system stabilizes at a lower equilibrium. By the time sanctions might generate sufficient pressure for political change, that pressure has already dissipated through adaptation. The timeline mismatch is structural. The tool operates slowly. The target operates quickly. And populations adjust faster than the tool can compound. Sanctions occasionally produce intended outcomes. The pattern is specific. They work when the target government already faces internal fragility, pre-existing economic weakness, unstable political coalitions, divided elite factions competing for power. They work when elites are divided on the sanctioned policy itself, when significant portions of the leadership already favor a different course. Sanctions provide leverage to internal factions arguing for change. They work when clear exit conditions exist, when compliance requirements are specific and achievable, when ending sanctions is straightforward and credible, and they work on short time horizons. Before adaptation takes hold, before alternative systems develop. These conditions are rare. Most sanctioned states are not on the verge of collapse. Most elites are not divided on core security issues. Most exit conditions are vague or unachievable. And most sanctions persist for years. When these favorable conditions do not exist, sanctions reshape rather than resolve. If sanctions rarely achieve stated objectives, why do governments continue imposing them? They are politically convenient. Sanctions appear decisive without requiring military commitment. They signal action to domestic audiences. They demonstrate resolve without risking soldiers. They shift costs externally. The imposing government pays little. The target population bears the burden. Domestic political consequences are minimal. Sanctions also serve symbolic functions. They mark disapproval. They satisfy coalitions demanding action. They create the appearance of leverage even when actual leverage is limited. For policymakers, sanctions occupy the space between doing nothing and military intervention. Doing nothing carries political costs. Military action carries operational risks. Sanctions provide a middle option. The fact that sanctions rarely produce intended outcomes does not eliminate their political utility. They satisfy immediate domestic pressure. They defer harder choices. They maintain the appearance of strategy. Whether they work becomes secondary to whether they are politically necessary. This is not cynicism. It is institutional logic. Sanctions do not typically end wars. They manage pressure. They impose costs. They signal disapproval. They constrain options. But they do not force capitulation. Instead, they reshape the environment. They change incentive structures. They entrench alternative systems. They complicate resolution. Understanding sanctions means understanding them as tools of prolonged pressure, not decisive intervention. In the next video, we examine financial warfare, how currencies become weapons, how payment systems become battlegrounds, and why cutting off money does not cut off capability.